One of the observations we can make about the first 14 Psalms is that they seem to be arranged in a chiastic structure. Our first psalm is classified as a psalm of wisdom, or a Torah psalm. It states that God blesses those who delight in him and plant themselves next to him and use him as a resource. They will flourish. Psalm 2 says that Yahweh is the king. He is sovereign, and he rules absolutely. And then we have 5 psalms of lament. Essentially, the psalmist asking, well, if that's true, God, if you bless and you are sovereign, then why am I experiencing injustice? Why do I have enemies? Why do I suffer as I do? And so these have been called psalms of disorientation because they make us feel kind of out of sorts. Like, this doesn't make sense. God, you're good, you're powerful. So why, if I am trying to follow you, being a good person, why aren't good things happening to me? So it's disorienting. Then we have Psalm 8 that is very different than those. And then 5 more Psalms, 9 through 13, that are also disorienting. These Psalms seem to have more to do with societal injustice as the psalmist looks at systems and nations and cultures and says there are things that are wrong about those. And that also feels disorienting. Because it kind of relates to the second psalm. God, if you are sovereign, if you are the king of the nations, then why do the nations practice so much injustice? And then we return to this 14th psalm, which is classified as a wisdom psalm, also a lament in many regards, but is simply a statement that here's what a godless person does, and here's what a godless world looks like. And so we see this then as a chiastic structure. So one of the ways we see a chiasm is this A, B, C, B, A. So the pattern is repeated. There's a corresponding pattern of wisdom, lament, praise, lament, and then wisdom that frames it. And if we were to complete our diagram here, we would notice that Psalms 1, 2, 8, and 14 are what I would call psalms of orientation. That is, they remind us of ultimate reality. They sort of straighten us out and redirect us back in the right way. They remind us of these universal truths. And so you can see that the psalmist, as we go from psalm to psalm, the editor has arranged them in such a way that he's constantly bringing us back to reality, to the orientation, even in the midst of these psalms of disorientation and questioning of God. So now we're going to zoom in on these Psalms 9 through 13, these laments over societal injustice. And one of the first things that we note is in Hebrew, these are acrostics, Psalm 9 and 10. It's actually one psalm, and it's an acrostic, meaning it's based on the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and these 2 psalms, each 2 verses corresponds to a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so that ties them together. So we know that this is actually one psalm because of the acrostic structure, even though it's a little imperfect, particularly in Psalm 10. But the poet here is constrained by the Hebrew alphabet. This is probably done as a mnemonic device. It made it a lot easier to memorize if you're just kind of going through the alphabet with the starting letter of each successive verse. We also note there's no title for Psalm 10, and in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it's one psalm, and there's a common theme. And these psalms clearly connect with one another. Now, I mentioned the numbering, and this is also just a good point to notice. If you are reading from Catholic liturgical texts or Greek Orthodox texts, they follow the Greek numbering of the psalms, and you can see how that winds up being a little different. So I just want you to be aware of that interesting fact. The English translations that we follow the Hebrew numbering of the Psalms, the Masoretic text, and that's what we'll be doing in this course. As we look at Psalm 9, I just want to highlight some of the theology here. David is confident of God's justice. You've maintained my just cause. You've sat on your throne giving righteous judgment. You're enthroned forever. You've established your throne for judgment. So God is the just and the universal judge. That's the statement of theology here. And David still manages to have some confidence. The psalm opens with this exulting statement of praise and thanks to God. Again, God is sovereign. We're reminded of this. God's judgment is both punitive, and these verses here describe the way God executes judgment, and because the wicked are snared in the work of their own hands. It's that retributive justice that whatever you do will be done to you. Kind of the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. You want to hurt someone else, guess what? You are going to be hurt in that process. So God's judgment is punitive, but it is also restorative. Note verse 18, the needy shall not be forgotten always, the hope of the poor shall not perish. That justice also means restoration, particularly of the poor. And we have a societal injustice and free will. This psalm will accent the free will of the individual in this. Again, it begins with a complaint of God's distance, and then it describes the wicked as one who pursues the poor. They boast of their desires. They're proud of their sin. They are greedy for gain. They curse. They renounce God. They act as if there were no God, and they're confident that things are going to go well. They are never going to meet trouble, is what they think. They think in verse 11 that God never sees. He can do whatever he wants. And their words then are corresponding: cursing, deceit, oppression, mischief, iniquity. And in particular, he lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. So he becomes animal-like in his behavior, and the object of his animal behavior is against the innocent, the helpless, the poor. So he goes after the most vulnerable in society. He murders them. He watches for them that he can seize them, take advantage of them, use them for himself. So the prayer in verse 12 is to rise. God is a great example of anthropomorphism, of giving God human attributes. Lift up your hand. God, do something. Act, we pray. And we would also note in this psalm, we have what Nicholas Wolterstorff has coined the quartet of the vulnerable: the orphan, the widow, the foreigner, the stranger, and the poor. And these are mentioned here in the psalm as particularly ones that are victimized. And so the psalmist prays for God to act, to render them powerless by breaking their arms, to call them to account. Again, anthropomorphism. God, would you strengthen our heart? Would you lean in, incline your ear to our prayer, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more? God, do justice. Man's reign of terror would come to an end. A couple of interesting things about these two psalms, rather lengthy. If you put them together, we've got the longest psalm thus far in the book of Psalms. Psalm 9 focuses on the poor and on the victims who are oppressed by the nations, emphasizing societal systems of injustice, where Psalm 10 focuses on the individual, the wicked person. It recognizes the fact that while there are systems of injustice, there's also the matter of individual agency. People can still choose to do good or to do evil. And this seems to be the focus of Psalm 10, is of an evil person. And this is in contrast with Psalm 8, which describes the glory of man, the way that God has created man in his image, and to steward and to promote the flourishing of the earth. And we get to Psalms 9 and 10, it's the opposite of that. It's what happens when mankind rejects God and thereby rejects his origin as made in the image of God, his identity as a child of God, his purpose to bring God's glory and fruitfulness to the earth, and his destiny to live with God. When mankind rejects all those, we get Psalm 9 and 10. Psalm 11, again, continues to speak to societal breakdown. It's structured as a question and an answer. The question: how can you say to my soul, flee like a bird? What can we do when the foundations are being destroyed? The answer is, verse 4, the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. He sees. He's not unaware of what's going on. So the question here is, what can the righteous do when the foundations are being destroyed, when the culture, when a society is on shaky ground, when we undo the institutions that enable a society to flourish? What happens? And We can look no further than Western society, beginning really in the 60s, and when the undoing of the family, the assault on marriage that began with no-fault divorce in the 60s, and then Roe v. Wade in the 70s, and then the widespread acceptance of homosexuality and ultimately enshrining of same-sex marriage in 2015, that has continually degraded this family that is the essential foundational structure of society, that has redefined marriage, that has redefined what it means to be a man and a woman, so much in our society that is cracking the very foundations of a flourishing society. And the psalmist asks, what can we do? The answer is God is still on the throne. God's judgment is still true. Reality is still reality. The moral universe is still dictated by God and not by mankind. Psalm 12, which like its partner, Psalm 11, these two fit very well together. We have the complaint. It feels like the godly one is gone, the faithful have vanished, wicked are prowling, vileness is exalted. Particularly here we have the words of the wicked, the lying, the flattering, the deceit. And in contrast to that, we have in verse 6 the words of God. They're pure words. They're like silver refined in a furnace on the ground, purified 7 times. And so because of that, we can trust in God. He hears the cry of the needy. He hears them. He will arise and he will give them safety. And so we have this chiastic structure apparent there of Psalm 12. Then Psalm 13 simply asks the question 4 times, how long? How long? This is a classic lament of complaint, and a short request, motivation. God, here's why you need to act. You better do this. Otherwise, my enemies are going to boast and say they prevailed over me because I'm shaken. And so I have confidence in you. So we have this classic lament. It reminds us a bit, perhaps, of Revelation 6, of the martyrs who ask the same question, God, how long till you do justice? So in summary, as we look at these Psalms, we see Psalm 9 and 10 paired together. We actually one Psalm about God's justice for the poor. And we have Psalm 11 and 12, this, again, a pair of Psalms that describe a society that's crumbling and self-destructing. And even in the context of that, God is still on the throne. His words are still true. But we still complain, how long? And it's fascinating. I did a study of this, made a count at some point, and found these are all the questions in Psalms 3 through 13. And if you count them, I counted 13. It's kind of a coincidence. Psalm 13, unlucky. We think of the number 13, a psalm of lament with 13 questions between Psalms 3 through 13. And if you look at that again, we find that there are actually a couple of questions in Psalm 8. How majestic is your name, O Lord, repeated twice. So in the midst of all the disorientation, we have this reminder of the glory and the majesty of God, and He has endowed on His creation. So to learn some lessons from these opening laments, that is, one, laments teach us to be honest with God, to express our complaints. He can handle it. He can handle our frustrations. And then, secondly, to release our complaints to His care, to simply make our request before Him. And then finally, to trust in His goodness and be confident that His steadfast love endures forever, and we will experience His salvation. He has dealt bountifully with us in the past. We can be confident that He will do so in the future.